my name is Laurel Ann, and these are my worst books of 2019. Only coming at you here in February. Now, usually when I have negative feelings towards a book, I'm very careful to say that art is subjective and there's no such thing as a bad book. And for a lot of the books that I read this year that I didn't like, I can think of at least one person who I know who I would recommend this book to. But in the case of these 5 books that I'm going to talk about today, I would not recommend them to anyone. So, you know what? Today the gloves are coming off. And my disclaimer for the video is over. If you like these books, I don't think you're stupid. Anyway, these aren't in any sort of like ranking. They're just kind of in order from the most recent book that I read to the one that I read the farthest time ago. The earliest? First? Whatever. Backwards chronological order. Let's go. In December, I read A Stranger in the House by Sherry LaPena. This is about a woman named Karen who is in a weird car accident because she was driving recklessly. And shortly after her accident occurs, a dead body is found in a location that seems like it could be the location that she was driving away from. And the police become very suspicious of Karen because they think there must obviously be some kind of connection between this dead body and this woman's car accident. The story is primarily told through the perspective of Karen's husband and also her best friend, who is like very obsessed with Karen and her husband as a couple and also trying to get pregnant. Now, there are a number of people, some of my friends included, who really like this book, but I just really didn't. For one thing, like, it could have been called Housewife on the Wrong Side of Town because those words were repeated so often. This housewife on the wrong side of town must have been there because of a bad reason, because why would a housewife be on the wrong side of town? It just like the number of times that those words were repeated was comical. It was just like weird and kind of sexist and repetitive and like racist and classist, and I just like, ooh, it just really grated on me. But even more than that, I think that this book really just epitomizes a problem that I think is kind of endemic to the thriller genre, which is that the characters do things not because they make sense for those characters, but just because the author needed them to do those things to further the plot. And I understand that that's probably a really, really tricky thing to do, to write characters that are strong enough that when they're doing these really stupid and illogical things that you're like, well, of course that character would do that because I understand them. It just seems to me like it's easier to get thrillers published if they're not very good than like it is with other genres. Next, we have City of Strangers by Louise Miller. This is the story of a couple who come home from their honeymoon and they find a dead body in their flat. They don't know who it is. The police don't know who it is. No one knows who it is. And for whatever reason, the woman in this couple is very curious about this person. I think she is driven by grief from the death of her father and really wants to find this person's family and make sure that they know that their loved one passed. So she goes on an international adventure to try and discover the identity of this deceased person. Now, this book, it's just not terribly memorable, so I'm not gonna have a ton to say about it, but I remember that a lot of the writing just like didn't make sense. Like a whole paragraph would pass that would be like a description of action and I would just have no concept of what had just been described. It also did this thing that is pretty common in like mysteries and thrillers and action books where the villain is someone you would never expect because you've never given a reason to be suspicious of them, and then suddenly when it's revealed that they're the villain, they go all Jekyll and Hyde and they're like, mwaha, suddenly I am evil. And that's just something that really bugs me. I feel like when you're writing a mystery, you need to at least give your readers a chance to have some idea of what's going on. You can't just be like, oh, this person who's perfect is suddenly evil, right? The plot of this book is just sort of a bunch of seemingly unrelated conspiracies that are cobbled together in a way that doesn't really make sense. And there's an entire second perspective that isn't actually tied to anything. It's just there so that the inciting crime has a witness, because I guess the author thought that it would be impossible for the characters to solve the crime if there hadn't been an eyewitness, which, you know, there are a lot of different ways to wrap up a mystery. The characters in this book were also weak in the sense that I didn't get the sense that they exist outside of this story. They're all adults, but I feel like they were just spawned in order to go on this adventure. And then when the story's over, they don't exist anymore. Which, of course, is how fictional characters work. But I want to get the feeling like they had lives before. So that's City of Strangers. Alright, we next have a horror novel called Hex by Thomas Olde Hoyvelt, which is translated from Dutch. Apparently it's a very popular book in Dutch. It's a pretty popular book in English too. I think I'm in kind of a minority on this. This is about a small town in New York State in which, in like the 17th century I think, a woman was hanged for witchcraft. And I guess they were right about her being a witch, because then she puts a curse on the town where if you leave the town, you want to kill yourself. And also, the witch body just like walks around all the time, and she can like appear and disappear at will, and she's just like this creepy corpse lady who just like hangs out. Yeah, it's a really creepy premise. I was really excited to read it, but I just really did not gel with this book. The writing was bad. And I don't mean bad in that maybe it wasn't a very good translation. I mean bad in that Thomas Olde Hoyvelt seems like the kind of person who finds himself to be extremely clever and tries to come up with like quirky new ways to say things that actually just don't make any sense. Also, this book has a preoccupation with nipples. Nipples were everywhere. At one point, one of the teenage bullies rips off the witch's dress to expose her nipple and then stabs a box cutter into her nipple. A woman who died in the 1600s, a corpse nipple, which, like, weird, but okay. If that was it, I'd be fine with it. But then later, when the climax happens, another woman from town exposes her nipples, and then all the people together build like a thing that looks like a giant nipple, and I'm just like I feel like I've said nipple a lot of times in the last 30 seconds, but I have not said nipple as many times as this book says the word nipple, and it's a gross word. Let's move on from that. Next we have The Wall by John Lanchester, which is about a future dystopia. Climate change has caused sea levels to rise, a lot of the world is a desert, and Britain has built a big wall around it so that outsiders can't get in, keeping Britain for the British, which is a totally unimaginable thing that probably would never happen. Maybe it's a bit unfair that I'm putting this book on my list of worst books of the year, because I probably wouldn't have hated it as much as I did if it weren't for the fact that it was nominated for the Booker, and that just confuses me so much. But on the other hand, I wouldn't have read it if it hadn't been longlisted for the Booker, so I'll allow it. So what did I not like about this book? The writing is very boring. I really don't think there's anything special about the prose. I feel like he read The Uninhabitable Earth and was like, cool, now I don't have to do any world building for my YA caliber dystopian novel I'm writing. The women were really poorly developed. There's even a love interest in this who kind of becomes like the secondary lead, but I couldn't tell you anything about her. She just has no personality. I think the only reason this got any kind of critical attention was because it feels relevant. Obviously, many of us are worried about climate change, and this is just sort of an imagining of what the world might be like. And I'll say, like, it felt like it could be a real future, but I want something more. If you're gonna tell me that this is literature, you need to do something better for me, mate. The only reason I didn't DNF this, I think, was because of the narration of the audiobook I listened to. It was done by Will Poulter, and he is a really good performer, and he brought a lot to the story, but I think if I'd been reading this, like, on paper, I would have stopped after, like, 2 pages because it's very boring. The book also had this bullshit ending that was like, this is a happy ending because everything's okay for our two main characters. You don't have to worry about how the world is dying. And that just really undermined the content of the rest of the book for me. I would say message, but I don't really think this had a message. And the last book I'm going to talk about today is How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran. What can I say but yikes? I actually did kind of enjoy the experience of consuming this book. I listened to the audiobook, which was read by Caitlin Moran, and she is very charismatic and funny. It sort of felt like listening to a lot of the podcasts that I like to listen to, only just like very long. But the content of this is absolute hogwash. I think what she was trying to do here is sort of document her feminist journey and distill what her views were in 2011 when this book came out. But the title and the tone position this as some sort of like feminist how-to or like self-help, or it implies that it'll be somehow educational, and it's just not. Like, it's just Caitlin Moran's views. Some highlights of her insidious feminist ideas are, I believe that women should wear whatever they want, which is why I'm against the burqa. I believe that women should be able to look however they want, which is why you should never shave your pubic hair. The rest of your body hair though, yeah, like that's kind of gross. Probably shave that. I went to a party once where some older women had had plastic surgery and they seemed sad, so I'm against plastic surgery. Did you know I went clubbing with Lady Gaga one time? And that's just a small sample. I mean, she tries to comment on sex work and the pay gap and things that she just clearly has not educated herself on, and yet feels that she has the authority to educate others on. I can see where, had I read this in 2011 at the age of 18, I may have gotten something from it. She talks about how it's really important to say, I am a feminist, when it wasn't common to be open about being a feminist. I definitely have at least one tweet in the archive of my Twitter that says I'm not a feminist, but da 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 da. So I don't want to be like too hard on Caitlin Moran, but just like don't read this in 2020 or ever in the future. Okay, so those were the worst books I read in the year of 2019. Interestingly, they are all books that I listened to on audiobook. I just think that's kind of interesting. Like, what does it say about audiobooks and me? Thanks for watching. If you like any of these books, don't worry. Let me know what your worst book of the year was, or just the worst book that you've read this month. Whatever. If you want, you can also like and or subscribe. I would like that. I like attention. Okay, thanks, bye. Look how picturesque that cat is back there, just looking out the window. He's so handsome. The Wall by Jan Lanchester. This is just sort of an imaginating. Oh, here they are, these people who are here to do the story.